All right, so without further delay, I want to introduce Sarah Mwangi, who's the Assistant Superintendent of Learning Services in Joplin Schools, Missouri. She focuses on improving student outcomes through research-based literacy practices, and her work emphasizes aligning tiered interventions with core instruction, we just talked about, to support all learners, particularly in addressing challenges like student mobility. And she and Libby will be sharing the demographics of their district, so you'll understand the challenge there. Drawing on her experience as both a teacher and administrator, Sarah is dedicated to creating practical, data-driven strategies that empower educators to build a strong foundation for student success. And I can tell you, I know her well enough to know that that really is the core of her professional work and her personal mission. Libby shares that mission, and they're true colleagues and true leaders in their district. Libby Bird has served as an educator with Joplin Schools for 19 years, holding roles as a classroom teacher, a literacy specialist, instructional coach. And Libby currently serves as the coordinator of elementary curriculum and instruction. Thank you so much for joining us, Sarah and Libby. I can't wait for everyone to hear your story.
Yes, thank you for having us. As we kind of jump in, just to really ground for you that may not be familiar with Southwest Missouri, we want to share just some fast facts about Joplin before we really tell you our story. So you can see here our enrollment trends. We stay pretty steady, 7,400 to 7,600 students across our K-12 campus. We serve a high mobility. These are our 10 elementary schools where we have this system in place, and you can kind of see our state average as well as our district average. We're well above the state average with our mobility. About 1 in 3 of our students move schools every year. And so that plays a big part into our story as we get into it. We serve a relatively high free and reduced lunch population. We sit around 60% or higher. These are our surrounding districts. Joplin is a smaller city, about 50,000, but we sit around a lot of small towns around us. And so we definitely have the higher end of the poverty within our region. And then additionally, we serve a high level of special education students. We've been working intently of decreasing this over time. As you can see, we've done some work with that. So we are making headway, but we still serve a large population, specifically with learning disabilities. So really just to tell you our journey, we want to kind of walk through a timeline. And this actually started pre-COVID, as wild as it seems. We had a couple of teachers, Joplin has been in that history where many of you may feel we've been living in an upside down triangle. We were trying to serve anywhere from 60 to 70% of our students in an intervention. And we were sending our students out to intervention to our title teachers and hoping that they would fix them and they would come back. And I often refer it to a hamster wheel. It wasn't for a lack of trying. We had teachers working extremely hard, trying to do a lot of things, but we weren't making headway. Keep in mind our high mobility rate. We were trading kids among our campuses quite often. And while one teacher had good intentions, they would send a student, transfer them to another school, also with good intentions, but the language wasn't similar. Our strategies may not have been similar, and the skill deficit we're addressing may not be similar. The other piece of our story, we fell into the trap of what I called title lifers. Once title, always title. You got there and you stayed. It wasn't a system that you came in and out of that. And so in April of 2019, we had a couple of teachers who attended, it was actually a 95% symposium up in Kansas City. And it really drove us into, we talked a lot about product, and we have made the mistakes of chasing shiny stars. And we realized we had a major lack of teacher knowledge, and we really had to get in and understand the why with what we were trying to do with literacy. So we implemented a 4+ year sustainable plan, 4 letters, district-wide. We had 30 teachers who began volume 1 and our administrators engaging in that work. And we ended up moving it where all 10 elementaries, we developed our own facilitators. Now, this was in the midst of COVID hitting. They went through volume 1, volume 2, the facilitation for volume 1 and volume 2, and they stayed the course. It's quite amazing to reflect and think about that time, but they did a lot of amazing work in a short amount of time. So once you hit the 21-22 school year and they finished up their letters facilitation, they started training their teachers in their buildings. And so these were mostly K-2 teachers in volume 1 to get started in the 21-22 school year. And then we kicked off our intervention. And so we started with actually that intervention level within our system. And so our title teachers got on the same page. They were doing the same interventions. And then we started adding in some summer work with our booster bundles that we worked through 95% with. We, for the first time, started seeing our students move in and out of intervention. And we'll show you, Libby will go over our flow chart. You can kind of see what that looks like for us. We continued our work, and quickly we knew you cannot intervene your way out of a tier 1 issue. We had an upside down triangle. And while interventions started to get on the same page across our campuses, what was happening in our tier 1 was not consistent, and it was not aligning to what we were doing in intervention. So in 23 and 24, we added in 95 core phonics for kindergarten, first and second grade. And then we moved into third, fourth, and fifth grade from there. And so we have a system now where we are K5 with K3 being core phonics, 4-5 being the word study, and our interventions directly aligning with that. And as I walk through some of this data to kind of show you where we're at, I share our story to not tell you that we have arrived. We have not arrived. We still have work to do, but to give you some encouragement of how to get your systems aligned, because just like Laura had shared, we have taken a lot of cognitive bandwidth off of our students simply because we have systems that the students understand. We use the same language in tier 1 as we do in intervention, as we do in our special education classrooms. We've had some really intent driving forces that all kids get tier 1. They do not come out, no matter the complications of a master schedule, they do not come out of the tier 1 classroom. All kids have to receive that. Then we can move the intensity based on the MTSS structure of what they need. So I'll let Libby kind of talk through our system and how we've developed that, and then we'll share some data with you.
All right, so as we mentioned before, with as large as our district is with 10 different buildings, we knew that we had a problem with identifying students in similar fashion. So at building A, we may have identified using one tool, where at building B, it was not the same tool. So when our kids were being transient and moving around, we weren't able to communicate and use the same language on where they were at and what interventions they actually needed. So 95% has helped us with that. We have started with the phonemic awareness screener, or the phonemic awareness diagnostic, where we can see now where kids fall and what skills they actually need. So that has helped tremendously with that problem. Same thing goes with our phonics continuum. We now, even though we've dumped before kids into the phonics bucket, we now can see what skills within phonics that students need, and we can give those intensive instruction to them within our intervention processes. The other thing we noticed was that we didn't really have a way of universally screening students to make sure that we, once again, were all on the same page on how we were identifying and filtering our student population down to the most intensive kids that we needed to serve. So this is where we have worked with our 95% coaches and their knowledge, and then our knowledge from letters, to develop our own flow chart system to help us figure out our whole population. How do we universally screen them, which we use dibbles? How do we take that composite, and how do we sift down to the kids that we actually need to know more about, where we give the diagnostic, either the PASI or the PSI, through 95%, to then identify the skills that they need so that we can plug those holes for them to become readers.
And I'll just share on this part, you may notice on second and third grade. So this is a beginning of year. So if you think of kindergarten, and we worked with 95% consultants to kind of identify the hot spots. In kindergarten, we are most concerned with their phonemic awareness, right? That's the hot topic, hot button item. When you look at this filter, that PASI is going to diagnose that phonemic awareness deficit that we need to intervene on, all while core is still happening. In first grade, for beginning of year, you will notice that we have split the kids out into PASI or PSI. You are only going to see this in first grade at the beginning of the year because we know we still have some kids who need to shore up some phonemic awareness skills. Once you get to second and third for the fall, I want you to notice there's no PASI kickoff, and that is intentional in nature. And what you can't read, probably the writing is too small, we front load. So if we have phonemic awareness deficits in kids, we don't ignore them, but we also have to get them moving on their phonics deficits. And so what we do is we front load the PA and we get them into their phonics skill for intervention. And keep in mind, core is still happening, and there's a lot of PA embedded into good tier 1 instruction as well. So I just wanted to highlight that for you. What has the data told us? When we look at kindergarten, this is also good information for you to know. 1 and 2 of our kids come with no early learning. They don't come with daycare. They don't come with preschool. They're literally coming from home to us. So we have a wide range of skill set when we're starting school. 1 in 4 kindergarten students successfully have been benchmarking on phonemic awareness at the beginning. And by the end of the year, we are hitting about 80% of those students. So we have seen phenomenal growth in our kindergarten students with those phonemic awareness skills. We have noticed we had some blending issues with our kiddos. So we have added back into our tier 1 curriculum some explicit blending activities to help move them along the continuum. In first grade, we have about 35% of them coming in proficient in phonics, and we are ending the year about 65%. So as you can see, it's not where we want to be. We still have work to do in this area, but we've identified the need to increase some fluency as a priority, drawing attention to letter sound automaticity. And sometimes we can forget that once they get past that kindergarten age. And then when we hit second grade, I call it the great divide. This is where we're really starting to see in our data the haves and the have-nots. The kids split into 2 groups. You have students who are benchmarking and they're just fine and they're moving along. And then you have this population who are stuck, where we're front-loading PA and we have them in intensive phonics intervention. And so with that, one of the things that we know moving forward, and Laura says this frequently in her talks, we need more reading mileage. Our kids need more practice. When you go back to that cycle that she had shared at the beginning and you go down that continuum, we have to get some more reading mileage out of our kids and some practice. Then as you enter our 3rd through 5th grade, we get into now the upper grade teachers are starting to realize they need some of the why. They're building that multi-syllabic words and routines, and they're into core. We're starting to see a shift with our moving from learning to read to reading to learn, and that's starting to shift in our data. So it's pretty exciting what we have coming through our system. This is my favorite slide. I wish you were in person because I hope it makes you giggle, maybe not giggle in a good way. But since we're not, this is, look at the dates down here. This is October of 19 all the way to March of 20, right? Before we all went home. And this was our first round of intervention when we started interventions in our system with 95%. And you can notice that these kids are skyrocketing in many times. So we call this, I had a literacy mentor, Judy, who once told me, Sarah, this looks like the classic ABT, ain't been taught. And that is really true for what we saw in a lot of things. It wasn't that our kids who were transient, poverty, special needs, it wasn't that they couldn't, it's that they didn't have the opportunity based on what we did or did not do with explicit instruction. And so we saw that right off the bat, kids just skyrocketing with their data, which was really encouraging and motivating to our teachers. And then as we get into our 95 Phonics Core program, we really created situations where the data speaks for itself. What I would encourage you is listen to your teams. We really had a system from my perspective, helping lead this work at the district level, our teachers, once they got the efficacy of the knowledge, they know what we needed to do. And so it was really empowering them to move along that. We started a slow rollout with kindergarten, with core, added in first and second because they started begging for it. We've had some movement in our state with some resources. So we were able to add 3 through 5 on in 1 year. But we've had some more hesitation in our upper grades, especially 4, 5. And you probably can imagine reasons why. They're not used to foundational skills. And so they're in that a little bit of uncomfortable state, and we continue working with them. And then the final thing I'll just say, speaking from my own experience, I have a daughter who's a good reader. She reads pretty well. And so sometimes you can get in those habits where kids think, oh, I don't need this, or teachers think, oh, I don't need this, as you get into that 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. But what we are noticing, and just from her example, she's telling me about morphology as a 9-year-old. Well, I can promise you that before we did not explicitly teach really good morphology. So when you take that skill that we're developing, even in 3rd, 4th, and 5th, take that into middle school, high school, college, career, they're really developing good morphology, a stronger vocabulary, as well as how they're tackling multisyllabic words when you're getting into science, high math terminology. So even if you're in a system where maybe you have a lot of good readers, there is still a piece that I would encourage you to dig into when you're looking at those word study components with your upper elementary. And then last but not least, this is just one success story of 10 campuses, just to give you some real data. In 2021, 22, that whole time frame, we had a school where 183 students out of that K-5 school were qualifying for intensive services. And then where they sit today, they are down to 20% of that population receiving support. And what that's allowed, our staffing hasn't changed, but now our title teachers can also become instructional leaders for their teachers in that tier 1 setting as well. So the shift is happening. We are not arrived, but we are well underway. And it's just encouraging to see really an at-risk population we serve with the ability to move forward and become readers, which will help them for their whole career.
That is fantastic. Thank you so much, Sarah and Libby, for sharing your story. And I just have to say, the data tells the story so well. And I just so appreciate the work that you continue to do, the relentless work that you continue to do. As I was listening to you, I thought I kind of had like some major ahas. When you started out by saying it wasn't for lack of trying, and that's so true. There's no shame, there's no blame. We're all trying really hard, but you recognize really well, I think, that then you have to start with the importance of why. You have to lay that foundation of why for teacher professional, and that's where teacher professional learning comes in. The other point that I think that was so beautiful is that it's all about coherence and alignment and consistency across tiers of instruction, across your materials that you use. You're using 95% group, our core and our intervention, and they're completely aligned. But then also coherence and consistency across the whole district, especially in a high mobility population, when kids are moving around, so they can seamlessly move into their instruction, knowing what to expect. The third thing, the importance of the diagnostics, we just can't overestimate that. And the fourth thing you said, ongoing journey. Thank you for that. This is an ongoing journey, and striving to always do right by our students and to do the best possible, make the best possible moves that we can make for our students. And again, I just so applaud and appreciate you in your tireless efforts on behalf of your students. So I just wanted to, reiterate, because 95% Group publishes just terrific aligned literacy resources. I wanted to make sure to say, that those resources must support our educators, our teachers, in actualizing what we know from the evidence, right? So we want evidence-aligned instruction. We have, 95% Group has a wonderful literacy intervention system, which creates that ecosystem of assessments and instruction. Our literacy intervention system, it can diagnose at the phoneme awareness level and the phonics skill levels, those gaps at a very granular level, and organizes that data to help automize and manage the grouping. That's huge. And it'll help us with progress monitoring and offers all that visibility to all the stakeholders that we talked about earlier. So it really is a system that supports MTSS frameworks, and it also includes professional learning. So that's what we're really looking for, is that alignment, consistency, and coherence within an assessment intervention system that allows the collaborative problem-solving process to unfold. And Phonics Lesson Library, which is what they're using in Joplin, it's that tier 2 intervention. It aligns with that screener, with that diagnostic, and it provides really specific lessons that are aligned in lesson planning. They're aligned in the routines that the kids are using. And it really allows us to teach skills to mastery using structured literacy, application of skills within reading and writing, and this whole digital format to really deliver things, deliver instruction efficiently. So just a little alignment there that I wanted to make sure you knew. So when we think about, our phonics lesson library, our intervention, we can assess them with our literacy intervention system that'll help us group our students and point to the actual lessons that kids need to be engaged in to fill those gaps. And what's possible with all of this, with all this aligned, coherent, high quality, evidence aligned instruction? Well, we know with all of that delivered by a skilled teacher, the percentage of first graders below that 30th percentile can be reduced to 4 to 6%, which is where our name comes from. 95% or more of our students can learn to read. All right, very good. Thank you so much for joining us today. Again, key takeaways. You need to look at that root cause, look upstream, and know that professional learning is a huge part of this to help us provide effective instruction. And thirdly, look at the whole system. You have to have a system that is aligned in assessment, data analysis, resources, and reporting. Because the truth is we don't have time to waste. We have to get this right. Here's our contact information should you want to reach out to any of us to hear more about our stories. I did want to mention, there was one question I know for sure, and it was a question about resources for multilingual students. What happens when we have to follow scripted lessons, vocabulary questions, and there's no flexibility? I wanted to address that question because I think a lot of us with our second language, our English learners, have the same questions. So, we have, luckily in-house, we have an expert in this field. His name is Dr. Antonio Fierro, and he's able to provide for us a lot of guidance in terms of how do you scaffold even a lesson that's designed for native English speakers. How do you scaffold and support your multilingual learners within that lesson? And if you check out our website, we have a drop-down box under professional learning called Insights, and he's written about that very topic. How do you make adjustments in scaffolding even within a very explicit lesson plan? The other thing I do want to say, though, is I'm a big fan of lessons that have consistent and explicit instructional dialogue because it helps us as teachers maintain that focus on the lesson plan and also gives us the freedom to internalize that language so that we can then focus on the students. So that scripted instructional dialogue, I think, is really important, especially at the beginning when we're starting to use a resource. But nonetheless, please look up on our website, and I don't know if Barb is able to drop that in the chat, but we have a lot of insights from Dr. Fierro on that very topic. And it looks like she just did that. All right, very good. Thanks, Barbara. She's always on the ball. All right, so I thank you all for joining us this afternoon. It really has been a pleasure. Sarah, Libby, once again, thank you so much for sharing your story. I know it was really inspiring and informative for our listeners today. So that's it, everybody. Thanks again, and hope to see you next time.